The big one is the first episode of the second season of Good Advice. This is directed by Ted Bessell, and as always, there will be spoilers from now as I talk about the episode and share some thoughts. And I was curious to see what this season would be like, as I expected there would be some changes, and there are, but the episode is actually all about change and how Susan is or is not coping with those changes. It actually starts off in her bedroom, which is quite different, as most episodes have started off in her office, and she wakes up with a lot of bedhead, absolutely adorable, to the radio playing Whitney Houston, and then she has a lot of energy, and her son comes in and he asks her if she's no longer depressed, because her husband moved out relatively recently ago, by which I mean 6 weeks ago, and she's been sleeping a lot. She thinks she's been sleeping a little bit. She went to bed on Saturday, and she now thinks it's Sunday morning. It's actually Monday morning, and she reassures her son everything will be fine, and as soon as she says that, there is an earthquake. We're then in the main building for the rest of the episode, and Artie is on the phone with his mother, Ronnie, and she's quit. She's no longer the receptionist, which I was not happy about. But we do get a positive outcome, and I'll talk about that in a second. Jack suggests to Susan that she isn't behaving typically for somebody going through a divorce. Jack, as a divorce lawyer, obviously sees a lot of people in this situation, and Susan's behaviour is very atypical. She's just saying everything is fine, she's okay, there's not a problem. Clearly, she's bottling things inside. And then a woman comes in, and this is Susan's sister. She's played by Teri Garr. She's called Paige. And this is where I was quite excited, because I was upset that Ronnie was no longer the receptionist, but I do like Teri Garr, so I was quite excited about that. Paige has come over because on the phone Susan said she was fine, and Paige also acknowledges that that's not how somebody typically feels in this situation. And she lives in Seattle, or lived in Seattle, but she has now moved here. And it's very clear that Paige and Susan are very different characters. Paige is clearly very free. She's happy to move around. She doesn't have a problem with constant change. Susan, on the other hand, hates change. And this is very much the theme of this episode. When she found out that Paige had moved here from Seattle, the bag of oranges she was holding just dropped and spilled everywhere. Very, very well done. And then some clients come in, James and Annie. They're having a lovely conversation, and then James revealed that he's a woman trapped in a man's body. That's more change that Susan has to try and deal with. Obviously, it's a bigger change for James and Annie. And it was nice to see Susan with some clients, but we don't get too much of that. We very quickly move on from that. And then we visit the cafeteria. There's a new eatery in the building. It's very different. It's a lot more change. And I don't know if this is going to be a permanent setting, but I think it would be good if we had an additional location that was familiar, because we did spend in the first season a lot of time in the building, which I didn't mind. The offices are nicely designed, the set designs work well. I think having Jack's on the right and Susan's on the left, and then the main entranceway in the middle, it works really well as a set. But if we do have this cafeteria as a new location within the building, so it's familiar, somewhere we can go to regularly, I think that would be quite nice. It seems to be much brighter and just less stuffy. It seems to be like a more open space. I'm keen to see what they do with this space, if anything, but my initial reaction is that it's not too bad. However, Susan doesn't feel the same way, and she's pretending everything is fine, and then she sits down and she's offered a baguette instead of the crostini she was promised, and she starts shouting, screaming in fact, about how she wanted crostini. And obviously she's not really shouting about crostini. Everything, all of the emotions, all of this hatred of change comes pouring out of her, and it doesn't need to be said, but I will say it, that Shelley Long gave an amazing performance, as always. And I think it was nice that she finally was able to admit to herself that she isn't coping well with this, and that's fine. She's allowed to admit, she's allowed to feel that way. And immediately after, we have Paige looking after Susan. Right after Susan, during her outburst, had basically told Paige to go back to Seattle, which didn't come across as very nice. I know what she was trying to say. She was just trying to say, I don't need everybody breathing down my neck, gathering around me, not giving me room to breathe. But at the same time, the way she said it did seem quite harsh. And then immediately after, we have Paige looking after her, which was really sweet and nice to show that Paige didn't take what Susan said to heart. And Paige said something really, really useful, actually, and I think something all of us can do well to remember at some point. Susan said, I want my old life back. And Paige replied, your old life wasn't that great. And I love this because if, like Susan, I am very much like Susan with this, I hate change. Even if it's good change, I struggle to cope with it until it becomes familiar. And I know a lot of people are like that. So that desire to have the old life back because it's the familiar is really strong. But actually, do you want that back because it's good? Or do you want that back because it would avoid the change? And I think that that's something many of us could do well to remember, that actually that thing that's no longer around, we might crave it, we might miss it, we might grieve it, but are we grieving it because it was good or because it was familiar? And I really like that. I think Paige had the right attitude there and is, I think, going to be a really good thing. I'm assuming she's sticking around. She's now the receptionist. She doesn't want to be called the receptionist, but she is the receptionist. I assume she sticks around. I hope she does. She seems like a good character, and I rather liked her in this. And I like Teri Garr, so fingers crossed she sticks around for the full season. Jack then comes in with a chair, which is significant with the cafeteria scene, and it really helped to show that Susan isn't alone, because she kept saying she doesn't want to do this alone, but just because her marriage is over, she's not alone. She has so many people around her who care for her, who support her, who want to be there for her. And it's so beautiful to see. And it's a really solid episode to the second season. So yes, there are changes, but those changes for us as the viewer don't necessarily need to be bad either. And I'm really looking forward to watching the rest of the second season of Good Advice.